Okay, let's do this again. This is a Lamborghini Gallardo 2008. This one is the Superleggera, which is the hardcore track version of the standard car. My car's got a few mods. You can see the HRE, these are the P40 wheels. Blacked out tail lights. A lot of carbon on this car. The whole deck lid is made of carbon fiber. It's not glass, that's Perspex, sort of like a plastic window. Technocraft carbon air intakes. You can't really see it because of this exhaust cover, but the exhaust is a aftermarket Lamborghini Orange County exhaust, which is extremely light. I think it's just a muffler delete on that. So again, a lot of carbon, rear diffuser's carbon. The car does have swift springs, not a full coilover, but it is a lowering spring. And then it's got the LP 570 style front bumper. Let's go inside. So standard to this trim, you got carbon fiber door inserts, full Alcantara interior. I got a radio delete on mine. We can talk more about that later. Yeah, let's go for a drive. Okay, so here we are inside the 2008 Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera. Pretty Spartan interior. Lacking some of the creature comforts some would look for, especially with the fact that I am missing the radio. This was a unique car, and I specifically looked for a car that had these minimal options. One being the radio delete. Why? Because I didn't really care for the Audi entertainment system back then that it had. It didn't work as well. Plus, most of the time I'm just listening to the exhaust sound, so not something I really cared for, but also because I found it just more unique to have a car that had radio delete. The other thing that I went for was the non-carbon brakes, which was an option on this car, but I actually went to go test drive a car before I made my purchase that had the carbon brakes, and that was probably when the carbon brake option across all manufacturers started to kind of roll out. And I guess the way they were made in the beginning, they weren't all that great. They were either very on or very off. So a lot of people would tell you that you have to really get a lot of heat inside those brakes to make them effective or get them to work right, and that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I went down to San Diego. They had an orange Superleggera that had the carbon disc brakes, and I took that on a test drive. And I remember the first time I came to a stop, I had to really press on the brakes, and it almost didn't want to stop until I came very close to the car ahead of me. This was at a red light. And then finally, at the last few seconds, it just grabbed. So there's no modulation with the carbon brake kit that was available for this car. Or at least not in my 10, 15, 20 minutes of test driving that car. The brakes never, I don't know if it's just because I didn't drive it that hard and didn't get the temperatures up, but for just street driving, those brakes you couldn't modulate them. So when it came time to find my car, I specifically looked for one without that carbon brake kit option. Other than that, though, the car is pretty standard, pretty straightforward. Interior is all decked out in carbon. I don't think it's lacking any of the options list other than that. This car only has about 7,000 miles, which is not a whole lot considering it's a 2008. So this car is about 16 years old. It's not a car that I drive too often, as is the case with some of my other cars. But it is one that, for whatever reason, I never got rid of, just kind of held on to them. Especially when the Huracan came out. because if there was a point in time when I thought maybe I would prefer to trade this in for a newer model, it would have been when they launched the Huracan. And I'm going to be honest, I'm glad I didn't, for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't really like the look of the Huracan all that much. And this is my own opinion, but by the time the Huracan, I mean, now, right, the Huracan's ending its production. It's gone through many iterations. Um, but when I see a Huracan now, it doesn't really move the needle for me. Maybe because I've seen too many of them. They're pretty much everywhere between, seeing them on the streets or just seeing them on social media. So you kind of get desensitized to looking at them. Still great cars, but when you see a Gallardo nowadays, especially on the street and in person, kind of reminds you, kind of takes you back to a time when these things were a lot more scarce. I mean, when you saw a Gallardo back then, it was kind of an event, right? So um, I think the design of this car really held up well. Interior wise, I think you can make the argument that the newer cars are more comfortable, more suitable for daily. This car is quite Spartan. Like I said, you don't have the radio, but you do have air conditioning, and that works great. Other than that, you don't have cruise control, nothing, right? So, not very many places to store things in this car. You got a little glove compartment, a little tray here, in the trunk. It's not even worth mentioning. So it's a car that you really take out for a quick drive, not something you take out for a long or even a weekend getaway. It's just there's plenty of better choices for that. Now, this is the Superleggera, so this is the hardcore track version, as they say. Um, I guess sort of comparable to this car would be the 430 Scuderia, right? Because that was built and released around the same time. Now, the 430 Scuderia is based on the 430, and there's a quite a bit of difference in the way they transformed the car to the Scuderia. Sound deadening material, everything is all kind of removed. You got bare metal floors in that car. I'll make a video on that one later. But this car still retains some, I would say maybe sound deadening, because whereas the Scuderia, you would start seeing metal all the way down here on the door sills and the floor plate, this thing is completely covered in Alcantara. So it still gave you a little bit of, I guess, comfort if you want to compare the degree of hardcoreness that the Scuderia got. But that said, this still drove a bit more raw than the regular Gallardo. A lot of people like the Gen 1 Superleggera as compared to the second version, which is based on the LP570. And that is because the engine got updated in the later model. And I'm not sure if the firing order made a difference, but in terms of sound, this car sounds a lot more raw. And I especially with the exhaust added on, this thing just has a much higher pitch. But in terms of feel, I would say certainly the 5.2, which is the 5.2 engine based on the 570 models. They're probably a little bit faster, right? Probably a little bit of refined e-gear. But again, that's the question of how fast do you want to go. This car, I believe it's somewhere over 500 horsepower. Again, which is really plenty enough. I mean, my opinion is that anything above 400 these days for the street is going to give you a thrill, no matter what, right? But as far as how much you can use of the car, I really think anything like 700-800. I mean, you're just, where are you going to use that unless you're on the track, or I mean, if you're willing to risk your life or something dangerous, don't recommend that. But really, this is just plenty. I think for me, cars in the between the 2000s to 2010-ish is kind of peak. Those cars were still enjoyable in such a way that you don't have to, you feel like you're knocking on death's door before you get excited. I mean, my Porsche GT3, which is a 2015, I mean, you got to drive that, you know, really, really quick to start feeling the excitement. Whereas these earlier cars, the way they're built, you know, they're much smaller. Cars have grown in size. They're just not as insulated of the experience as compared to newer cars, which are built more refined. I think this is kind of the sweet spot. So anyway, let's start it up, get going, and we'll talk a little more. So I am the second owner of this car. When I first purchased it, it only had about 2,000 miles. And I probably, again, about 7,000 miles right now. So about, you know, put about 5,000 on it. They're definitely enjoyable miles. Very easy car to own. This car, I mean, other than regular service, really have given me no headaches. I think, I'm not mistaken, this generation of Lamborghini had some relations to Audi, and some of the Audi technology has carried over. Like, for example, if you look at the AC controls, it's very Audi based. So that might have lent itself to its reliability. I've never driven an R8. I've sat in plenty of R8s, so I don't know how much of a direct comparison one would make of this chassis to an Audi R8. Some people have said it's similar, others say it's a whole different world, so I don't know. But as far as driving this in itself compared to some of the other cars I have, by itself it's a very unique experience. So you got the V10 engine, which has a good amount of torque. It revs pretty quick as well. So it's a very satisfying engine to have, and it's not one where you got to drive it all the way up to the high range of the RPM, the RPM to enjoy the car. This one has an 8,000 red line, but you've already you know, really gotten to enjoy it anywhere from 5 to 6. So a really good and fun car to have. So release the brakes. This one's got the front lift. I'll raise that for a second here. Put it in sport mode. That's usually how I like to drive the cars. And we'll get going. When this car first came out, I believe it came out after the Murcielago, which is the V12 version, and I kind of thought about that car as far as making my Lambo purchase. I test drove a few, but ultimately I settled on the Gallardo, and mainly because the Gallardo is a smaller, more nimble car. The Murcielago is a big car in comparison to this, and I can't really get comfortable with the big V12s from Lamborghini. Why? Because the way you sit in the V12s, you're kind of tilted towards the center of the car, and it was just kind of awkward, you know, kind of slanted towards the center while you're driving straight. If you ever sat in a Murcielago, you know what I mean. I don't know if it's the same effect in a Aventador, but yeah, the Gallardo just felt more like a car that I could go into twisties with, and just have better control and feedback. In reference to the Cybertruck, if you saw the video that I made on my Cybertruck, this is what I mean by the dashboard, right? Because when you sit in this particular car, you kind of feel like the dashboard goes on forever. I mean, I remember the first time I sat in this thing, I was thinking, man, that's a really awkward and long dashboard. I'm used to it now, obviously, but the Cybertruck takes this to another level. I mean, the Cybertruck is probably twice, if not more, times as deep as this dashboard ratio to where you're sitting. But you know, I'll make another follow-up video to the Cybertruck. I am getting used to it now, and it's become second nature. Just as this car has too as well. So, what can I tell you about this car? Well, let's start with maybe the downsides, right? There's not too many, keeping in mind this car has a purpose. So you're not going to get cup holders, you know, you're not going to, I mean, even if you had a sound system in here, I don't even think it was that great. I think it was only a couple speakers in the door. So I don't imagine you would have got great sound out of it. A lot of people would complain about the E-gear, which is the paddle shift system in this car. It is jerky, without a doubt, if you don't know how to drive this car. I've driven it 5,000-ish miles, and I can still tell you that I'm not 100% perfect on this thing. I don't think it's me. I think it's the way it shifts. Although, you know, if you're driving this thing fast, the shifts are fast, and they are very, very aggressive. They will slam you. When you shift fast in this car, when you're going really fast, it slams you in such a way that it makes you jerk. Not an uncomfortable jerk, but it adds to the experience of driving this car. You know, a lot of these dual clutch cars now, the shifts are so smooth that yes, you're going fast and you're shifting fast, but you lose a little bit of that I guess an additional sensation to the overall experience, right? Like, for example, I know a lot of people who have the Huracans and get sort of, if you will, those tunes. They tune it for the burble, right? Where you have the backfire and the pops. I mean, why are you tuning your car to have features like that if it's already a better car? Well, it's because, you know, you're trying to regain a little bit of that sensation that they took out of the car. This car, just by nature, without any additional tune, backfires and burbles. So, you know, I make the argument that are the dual clutch transmissions in the Huracans too smooth? I don't know. To be honest, I've never driven a Huracan, so I can't say. But as it relates to your daily driving on this, the shifts, again, if you know how to drive the car, you're fine 99% of the time. It's that 1% you're caught off guard for whatever reason, and it may not even be your fault, it's just the way the car shifts. It's not perfect. But again, it's something I'm willing to forgive. It's part of this car, it's part of the charm. In relations to that though, the manuals have become all the rage, and especially on Lamborghini Gallardos. It's no different than a Ferrari 360 or even a 430 that you can find in manual these days. They're far and few in between. So it's almost a unicorn if you can find a Gallardo, much less a Superleggera in stick shift. I think a lot of people would say that the ultimate unicorn in a Lamborghini Superleggera would be a white with manual transmission. I don't know. I don't even know how many manuals were made. But what was interesting and as a thought was the idea to convert this to a manual. Now, I would only ever consider doing so if I could find 100% factory OEM parts to do the swap. I have no interest in going with an aftermarket kit. I feel like that kind of butchers a little bit of the authenticity of the car, whether or not that delivers a product that is same or 100% equal to a factory manual. To me, it's just not worth doing that. So I have put out some feelers just to see if those manual parts are available. I haven't gotten too much feedback, but then I haven't pressed it too much. But if this car can be converted to a manual, I would give it very, very, very strong consideration in doing so. But as far as an E-gear goes, I have no complaints. You know, the shortcomings, what have you, I think it's just part of the charm. As far as my other sort of considerations in terms of tuning this car, I thought about doing RZ is a brand that does make a fully adjustable coilover. The reason I would say that I would consider that is because, to me, even though with these swift lowering springs, it's still a little bit on the softer side. It goes over bumps very, very well. There's not a lot of that rebound where, you know, if you go over a bump, it still kind of shakes you a little bit before it settles. This suspension is very taut, so if you go over a bump, it settles right away. But just for my own liking, though, I prefer a much stiffer ride. The 430 Scuderia that I have, that suspension is quite perfect from factory. That car is lowered, but we'll get into that car in a separate video. But just in comparison to the two cars, I prefer the 430 suspension. So if there is a way to have gotten stiffer springs on this car, I would. At least at the time that when I got the Swift springs installed, there wasn't any other options other than just the JRE coilovers. So this car, I think it still gets a lot of looks, a lot of recognition. A lot of people who see this on the street still love to take pictures and whatnot. It's not the reason I bought this car. In fact, I don't even really like the attention. But, you know, if you're going to have to go out for a drive, it's just part of the gig. I personally think this design is kind of timeless. You know, it's really strange how sometimes when you're in the moment and you have nothing to compare it to, a particular car design may or may not really capture you until you have something really to compare it to, right? I think this is the baby Lambo. Before this generation of Lamborghini, they only had the Diablo series of cars. And now that the Huracan has came out, the Gallardo stands as that sort of comparison. And if you're looking at it from a design standpoint, I think this thing has kind of became a, in my opinion, a classic. It's really something that I think if I saw on the street, I would do a double take over looking at a Huracan. Again, I don't know if that's just because of the influence of social media and the fact that, you know, they sold a ton more Huracans, and so there's a good chance that you probably end up seeing more of those. So going back to that whole desensitized thing. But, you know, does that make a good argument? Because there's plenty of 997s, right? Before the 991 and 992 chassis in the Porsche lineup. And I'll catch myself looking at a 997 and appreciating that more than even a current generation 911. Case in point, I think the 993 is probably the most beautiful and most, probably the pinnacle of 911 design so far. And so if you park the 993 next to a 991 or a 992, I would say the 993 would capture my attention way more. So, you know, again, not being biased about this car, I just feel like this car's design has outlasted a lot of opinions. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people who feel the same way about the Gallardo design as compared to the Huracan. Now, you know, does the market agree? I don't know, right? I mean, a lot of these cars have depreciated. I think if you went out and you bought like a first model year of this car was made in what, 2004? I think you can probably find a few high mileage cars, probably in the 80s or 90s, depending on condition. I don't really know how much the Superleggeras are going for. There's not a lot of transaction prices. These things are quite rare. I don't remember how many came to the States, but I don't even think the overall production numbers are that great. It's somewhere between 300 to 500. Someone have to look that up. And yeah, you know, this is one of those cars where, as I've talked about in like my 997 video, it's a car where I just kind of figured I got this far with it, and it's gonna be hard to find another car that can give this same driving experience or better, I think. So that leads me to say I probably won't get rid of this car either. I think this car is fine sitting in my garage. Maintenance is very, very reasonable. No belts to change that I recall. I think this is just a straightforward oil change, filters, brake fluids, those kind of things. You know, probably typical maintenance runs you around $500-600 a year, so not too bad. You know, as far as Lamborghinis go, I think that a lot of people would say that they would love to have a V12, right? Because that's pinnacle Lamborghini there, and I may consider a V12 at some point in the future. As I'm making this video, the newer V12 platform, the Rovelto, has been announced, and some deliveries have already occurred. If I'm honest with you, I don't really like that car. I don't really like the way it looks. I think the best angle on that car is probably the tail section, because it's so in your face and brutal that that I think it's the most interesting angle of that car. I don't like the side profile, especially with that zigzag cutout behind the door. I don't know, something about it, the design just kind of looks broken up to me. I'm not a fan of it. So if there was a V12, I honestly think the Diablos are the most beautiful V12s of any Lamborghini lineup. I would love to have a Diablo SV or Diablo 6.0. I think those are, to me, the most beautiful Lamborghini V12 designs ever. You know, a lot of people would say the Miura is, but something about the Diablo, the way that car looks, that I think I could probably just stare at for hours. I appreciate the Miura. I mean, that by itself is also beautiful, but the Diablo is something else. Aventadors, you know, they're a very big statement piece. There's no doubt about that. In fact, I think even the SVJ or the SV are the more aggressive looking Aventadors, and I would probably, I don't know, I would say maybe consider owning one, although the SV Aventador, I've heard, does not drive well. Everybody that's had one kind of says that the driving experience is kind of lax. So, I don't know. That kind of leaves the Ultimate and the SVJ. Maybe I'll have to test drive and see. But again, I'm very content with this car. Like all my cars, this whole thing is completely PPF'd. So I have to thank Ryan down at Protective Film Solutions down the OC for that. He does all my cars. A lot of construction going on here today, so sorry about the interruptions in the video. But yeah, so you know, what more can I tell you? It's a fast car. You can drive it like a hoodlum if you want. It's just another car that I find no reason to get rid of or trade up for. At least not until they maybe make something that's a lot more convincing. And plus, this is one of the lower mileage cars. I think on Bring a Trailer, Superleggera, that's very similar to mine, although I think that one is 100% original, meaning it has the OEM wheels and the front bumper is original. And by the way, I have everything that's still original to this car stored, right? So I have the original bumper, the original wheels, original exhaust. This thing can be converted back to 100% stock, no problem. But that car on Bring a Trailer, I think only had about a couple thousand miles, and it went for about 182,000 or so. So I think these things have kind of hopefully found the ground and will continue to appreciate. You know, when I purchased this thing, I think the Gallardo pricings were kind of crashing. So you can say I kind of lucked out. I think I bought this probably below 140, believe it or not, from a Lamborghini dealer. So clean car. I'm the second owner. Yeah, I don't drive it all that much, mainly because I don't really like dealing with you know, the attention that it gets. But you know, it's something that if it's parked in the garage, I can easily spend, you know, 30 minutes just kind of gawking over it. It still takes me back. It still excites me. The design of this car still you know, still interests me. So yeah, I mean, I love, like I said, I love owning interesting cars. And sometimes the cars aren't necessarily great performers, but just from a design standpoint, I just love the way they look. So yeah, that's part of the reasons why I buy some of the cars that I have. Anyway, I don't know what more I can tell you about it right now, other than if you have any questions or comments, please ask and leave them.